everybody for coming. Good morning. Well, again, thank you all for being here today. And welcome to Telling Stories That Matter, inclusive across media. I am Mabel Regalado Hernandez. I am a journalism student here at Loyola University, pursuing a career in broadcast journalism with double minors in marketing and political science. I am also the founding president of our National Association of Hispanic Journalists, which I'm honored to be your panelist today as I introduce these your moderator today, as I'll introduce these panelists in just one moment. And for NAHJ, we work to connect with journalism and mentors where we can expand Latino representation in media. That is the purpose of NAHJ. But today, in today's conversation, we are going to focus on how storytelling across from journalism, social media, marketing can reflect and create a narrative that reflects community through authenticity, dignity, and representation. Whether we're producing stories, documentaries, advertising, or hospitality brands, it's all about the choices we make, the people who we quote, the voices that we choose to elevate. It's how we shape the stories that we make that shape how the audience sees the world. Today, we will tell how stories reject stereotypes, prioritize ethics, and center authentic representation. I'm honored to be joined by these three outstanding professionals and a special guest whose work spans journalism, media production, and strategic communications. First, we have Ms. Shanika Dabney Henderson. Shanika is the global head of the video at The Atlantic, a 6-time Emmy award-winning producer whose career spans some of the biggest names in media. She has produced at CNN, NFL Network, and led content strategy for both the New Orleans Saints and the New Orleans Pelicans, shaping how sports stories are told across television, digital platforms, and social media. A New Orleans native and a Loyola grad, Shanika brings a powerful perspective on the future of sports journalism and multimedia storytelling. Please join me in welcoming Shanika Dabney Henderson. Next, we have Rochelle Oliver. Rochelle is a journalist and editor who founded Island and Spice magazine, a publication dedicated to celebrating Caribbean cuisine and culture. She previously served as breaking news editor at the New York Times, and her work today focuses on telling stories about Caribbean food and the global prosperity. She also serves as chair of the journalism committee at the James Beard Foundation, where she helps support and elevate food journalism worldwide. Please welcome Rochelle Oliver. Next, we have Ronald Evangelista. Ronald Evangelista works for the Spears Group, which is a full-service marketing and communications agency who works with various clients throughout New Orleans and Houston. The Spears Group is also the founder and producer of the National Fried Chicken Festival. Ronald is an advertising professional with over 20 years of experience and has served on the board of the American Advertising Federation, including serving as past president as well as serving several positions on the district level. Please welcome Ronald Evangelista. Thank you so much for being here today. I see you can use your mic at any time you'd like. We're going to start off. Let's jump right into our conversation about telling stories that matter and how representation, ethics, and craft intersect across media industries. So to broadly start, when you think about storytelling that truly matters, what makes a story inclusive, responsible, and meaningful to audiences?
What makes a story meaningful and inclusive to audiences? When I hear that question, the first thing I think about, like, who should be telling this story? I think it's really important that you have the right people reporting on subjects where the community that they enter will respect them and trust them. And, I focus on food now, but even my early days working with local papers, I remember when I was doing stuff with like the Broward Times in South Florida. This is when I was in college, and there was a story about a police officer who he was speeding down the street, did not have his lights on, the sirens weren't on, and hit a black man, and that person died. And other media folks came into the neighborhood trying to get the story from the community, and no one wanted to talk to the journalists that came in. And then here I was, college kid with the Broward Times. And so I remember these guys under a tree, obviously, they were working, but didn't, they were working under the tree. I'll just leave it at that, by this convenience store. And I was just really, bold, and I wanted the story, and the Broward Times wanted to really understand who was this person, and what happened that day. And I approached these men and I said, "Hi, I am a reporter." And they kind of like stood back a little. First they were like, who's this girl walking up to us? But then I kind of, when I said, I'm with the Broward Times, they said, oh, that's the only paper we read and trust, because it's the only paper that talks about the issues that matter to us, and is a paper that gave dignity to black people. And it was owned by a black publisher. It still is to this day. And they told me the story. They told me everything that happened. They gave me their names, which was a risk. They were going on the record about everything. And so that really was a strong foundation to my career, honestly, of understanding that it's really important to understand who you are when you show up in a space, and who you are will give you access, or it might not, right? And so how do you build trust? And I also want to just add that layer of what it means in a time where media in general is being questioned. That's why the truth matters. That's why proper representation matters, because the readers do care. Readers do understand if the publication cares about them. And the Broward Times was the only one to get that story, because it was a publication that cared about them. And here I was, this young woman, and they said, hey, I'm going on the record with you. This is what the police officer did. And it countered to a lot of what was already out there. The information that they said, which was right there, countered to a lot of what the other media had reported. And when it came time to transition from the New York Times, where I was a breaking news editor, that question came up again for me when I was asked by the food editor there to cover Caribbean food, and I had to ask myself, well, what would Caribbean food look like within the New York Times? Am I just going to be asked to cover like jerk chicken and mango salsa? Like that's, is it just like this tourism aspect of what the Caribbean is? To give you a little backstory, and the reason why I could ask that question, I can say this even as an insider at the New York Times. When I was on the copy desk, my editor there, I won't say his name, refused to give me time off for my grandmother's funeral because it was in Jamaica. And to him, if I'm going to Jamaica, of course I'm going. It's fun. Like, grandmothers don't die in Jamaica, I guess. It's just this idea. And so I had that in my mind too of how will my stories be seen in this publication where I am not, my story, my people are not respected? And that was coming from an editor. I was an editor. I was living this experience. So I went and I said, I am the person right now who can start challenging the narrative and giving dignity to the stories of chefs, because at the end of the day, a lot of chefs were, at that time, hiding their identity under the canopy of Latin fusion or international. They wouldn't say I'm a Trinidadian chef. They wouldn't say a Jamaican chef, because then they would just be forced to create just one representation of food. And so that gave me even more courage to step out and say, what if I gave New York Times level journalism attention to seeing Caribbean food, and what would that look like? And that definitely started a domino effect, I think, of encouraged a lot of other journalists to do the same.
I think the way I see it is really giving a voice to the voiceless and using your positioning, not necessarily even as a leader in a newsroom, but just your positioning to speak on behalf of communities that are underrepresented. And I think I had a similar experience working at CNN during what was a lot of unrest around police-involved shootings. Michael Brown and the Trayvon Martin trial was happening. There seemed to be some sort of shooting popping up, and that sparked protests, and they were violent. And a lot of the discourse in the newsroom at that time was, well, why are people destroying their community? Like, I get it, you're mad, but what is the point? Like, why you destroying your neighborhood grocery store won't change anything. And I think it was really important for me to give context and perspective of what was motivating that rage and what was motivating that desperation where your only outlet is just to destroy. I could have sat back, I guess, and let the narrative be crafted by people who were leaders in the newsroom at that time, but I felt like I'm here for a reason, even though I'm not a manager. I'm just one of the producers, one of the writers, but I do have perspective on it, and I do understand, and I understand because I've lived an experience of a police officer pulling me and my boyfriend over for no reason, and us being questioned and being pulled out of a car, and having to have my boyfriend in college tell the officer that his uncle was a police captain and that was the reason why we got immediately let go. And so that's one tiny experience in a microcosm and in a macrocosm of experiences that helps me understand why, if you live in a community and you're in an underserved community, the frustration that will boil over when someone in your community is killed by the person who is entrusted to protect them, that could boil over in a way that maybe you don't understand, but it is rooted in something, and it's rooted in something real. And I have felt throughout my journey in journalism and even in sports, because I worked at the NFL when players were protesting, and we had a lot of really interesting conversations around how to cover that. When we are the NFL network, we are the people we work for the league. And so how do we properly tell this story? I remember being on maternity leave, and a story broke about players who were upset because an owner of the team said that they were like we can't let the inmates run the asylum. And I called in from maternity leave, and I was like, I want to be on the editorial call. I want to make sure this is put in a context. I want to make sure our analysts who are going to talk about this today get to share their real opinion on it, and that we don't try to craft an opinion that feels good for the league, but that we allow them to speak authentically to how this landed with them. So when we talk about diversity in storytelling, I think it really just means making sure that true perspectives are put to the forefront, that everyone's opinion is put to the forefront, that we think deeper than our own personal experience and really take the time to understand everyone's perspective and how your upbringing, your culture, your community may influence you in a way that I don't have context to, but I'm at least willing to understand that context and to explore it, and then to infuse it into how we tell the story and help the broader community understand how we got to where we are.
So for us, so when my company is the Spears Group, and it's owned by, our president is Cleveland Spears. And so about 10 years ago, he came up to us and he said, I have this idea to do this fried chicken festival. And we all thought it was a great idea. But one of the things that we had to be really concerned about, and we had to be very conscientious and intentional about how we did this, was because Cleveland is a black man, and obviously fried chicken, there's a connotation with black men and fried chicken. So before we got to any kind of production or anything related to the festival, we had to make sure that we avoided all those pitfalls and narratives about, you know, a black man, black festival, because we did not want people to dismiss this as just like another black festival. So before we even got to like production and all that stuff, we made a point to create a very diverse team. We have production people from all over the country, all over the city, different backgrounds. We reached out to all these different vendors, Asian vendors, we have vegan vendors, Hispanic vendors, stuff like that, because we wanted to make sure that when we produced this festival, there was going to be this easy connotation of here's this black man that created this festival about fried chicken, and people would dismiss it as that, and we knew that it could be something that could unite the community beyond that. So as we planned this festival, like, we had to make every effort to make sure that we did not fall into those pit traps. So, like, again, our team is very diverse. We make sure that when we go to the media, we put different spokespeople in front of the media so that they know that our team is diverse. We highlight different musical artists throughout the community. And we just make every intention to make sure that that's not the narrative, because we knew that that was an easy narrative to get to. And we knew as advertising professionals and marketing professionals that we wanted to completely avoid that. So this is our 10-year anniversary. So obviously that we've learned a lot. We brought on sponsors. Like, we vet our sponsors to make sure that we have sponsors that align with that vision of making sure that everything is inclusive, making sure everything is community oriented. We don't have any corporate sponsors other than Raising Cane's, who is our presenting sponsors. We don't do any corporate sponsors. We make sure that everything is very locally based, community based, so that we can continue to tell that story that this festival is for the community, not just the black community, for all the community. So we reach out to vendors in every community that we can find. We do an open call for vendors. Anybody can apply to be a vendor. Anybody can apply to work with us. Musical acts, we take applications on musical acts from anywhere, because we want to make sure that we are not pigeonholed in this framework of it's a black festival in New Orleans.
All of the experiences that y'all have shaped and really influenced you on how important storytelling is when trying to prove a reflective or a narrative. As my professors have said, the way that we tell stories and the way our experiences is how about it's all about how we tell, how about we make the stories and tell it to the audiences. And speaking about representation, how do you make sure the communities you cover or represent are portrayed authentically and not reduced to a stereotype or a surface level narrative?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and I love to keep talking about fried chicken, for example, because it's a wonderful example of how a food was used to shame a community, and why that food was used to shame a community. I was doing a Juneteenth piece for Bon Appetit, and it was a Q&A, and Carla Hall was being interviewed, and she told this story about fried chicken and said that, when, following the emancipation of enslaved people, one of the ways that black people were able to then make income was selling fried chicken and selling watermelon, right? And instead of this being a sign of empowerment, they then took that as a way to then degrade and shame people who were doing something to empower themselves, to lift themselves up. And so now I remember, I didn't know that when I moved to Harlem. And I remember looking around at Harlem, and I was like, damn, do they really need this many fried chicken spots up here? Do we really need this many fried chicken spots? And on the summertime, there's all these watermelon trucks, and I was like, why are they doing this? This is way before I knew that that fried chicken and watermelon has always been, it's not just a sign of economic power, that's a sign of freedom. And this is a story when we talk about these food narratives. large part of my job is questioning, the first instinct that you have, questioning the narrative that you were told, because honestly, it's time for a lot of course correcting. In our culture, we call it like the woke culture, but it's really just like course correcting. Let's not just like carry on these narratives as facts, because they aren't. And so I think a lot of what I do before I can actually tell a story about a fried chicken festival, I actually have to, and you guys are doing that effort too, you have to, in a sense, rebrand. You have to re-educate. And then from that newfound knowledge, then we can move forward with the story. But until we actually make mention of that, we have to make mention of that in the story, so that we can all get on a new page, which is the correct page. So that's a lot of the work that is involved with what I do.
Yeah, I would say that it's a lot of, really what you were saying is that context is so important. And I think one of my frustrations when I was a young producer in local news was that I felt like we did all of these stories on like shooting, this person got killed, and that person, and another killing, and another murder. And it was all so surface level. It was just, constantly hearing about violence in New Orleans. And what I yearned for, and I have such a respect for journalists who do peel back that layer, and I'm thinking about Sharice Gibson at WWL right now, but who go the next step. Why? Why is it so violent in New Orleans? Why is this neighborhood riddled by violence? Why are people going to the most desperate and dark places in this particular community? That, to me, is telling the authentic story of people. Just reporting that someone got killed, a guy shot another guy, and then moving on to the next murder is not, in my opinion, true and authentic community storytelling. Why are people doing this? What brought them here? And I feel like that is the real challenge of today's journalists, of the incoming group of journalists, because now we're in an even shorter attention span environment, and there is this backlash against storytelling around root causes as we talk about woke culture. Resisting that urge and finding opportunities to take it a step deeper and really talk to people and gain a deeper understanding of the why, and then storytell around that why, and then storytell about the people who are trying to change it. There's so many different aspects that we really leave it on the floor. It's on the cutting room floor. It never makes it to the actual viewer. It never makes it to the audience to give them that additional layer, that additional context, that additional texture to help you understand how we got to where we are. And I think that is the most critical part of being a journalist, is to go that extra step, to take that extra time. I remember being an intern and going on a shooting scene, and there was a mom sobbing, just falling to the ground in tears about a murder that had happened on the street. It was their son. And we were there, and we interviewed people, and this person did that, and a suspect, and it was all just so clinical. And I was in my brain like, oh my God, like this is a person who lost their child. This is a teenager. Like what happened? Not what happened in terms of the bullet point that we'll see in a press release from the NOPD. What happened that drove one young person to take the life of another young person? What is happening in their home? What is happening in their neighborhood? What is happening in their school? And we aren't giving that level of depth in journalism on a normal basis right now. And I think, I sometimes feel like I abandoned journalism, and maybe I shouldn't have, but I did, because I couldn't take it. Like I wanted to go deeper, and I did not feel like there was space for it, and I felt like I was constantly butting up against a journalism culture that was trying to walk away from that. And so then I walked away from that type of journalism versus continuing to like bang my head against the wall. But I do hope that there are people who can stomach it more than I do, than I could at the time, and who have that fight in them to tell those authentic stories. I bring it to sports now, and I definitely make sure that when we attack sensitive issues around racism and sports culture, and even women in sports, all of these different things, but that there are people who have the fight in them, who will continue to question, continue to dig deeper and to push and to speak up. And even if you ultimately end up walking away, you can at least have the pride in knowing that you tried in the moments that you had.
So for me, in a marketing perspective, so I'm Filipino, so I consider myself Asian American, and I grew up in a time when when I grew up in school, literally when you do like the demographics, it was black, white, or other, and I was always the other. So for me, it's important to see people like me represented in media. When I first started my career, I attended a conference where it was a very prominent CMO of a company, and somebody asked him, "Why don't you market to Asian Americans?" And the CMO, CMO is a Fortune 50 company, whatever. He said, "Asians have the same buying habits as whites, so we don't need to market to them." And that was like an aha moment for me. Ever since then, I made it a point to make sure that Asian Americans and other diverse communities got representation, because that was obviously the point of view of all these people at the top. And even as I was going through my career, I didn't see a lot of people that look like me. And I mean, things are slowly changing, but I think when you're growing up, and it's very discouraging when that happens, So as I was continuing my advertising career, I got involved with the American Advertising Federation, and I ended up starting to do some programming for the local AAF chapter. And I was able to secure, his name is Bill Amata. He's a very prominent marketer. He's actually, he was recently inducted into the American Advertising Hall of Fame. And he's Japanese American. And he flew down to New Orleans. He on his dime, he came for free. He put on this amazing presentation of what it is to target Asian Americans. And it was a wonderful presentation. But after that, I started getting emails from people in the community. They were like, "Why did you bring this guy in? That was such a waste of time. We don't care about that kind of stuff here." And if you know anything about New Orleans, there's a very prominent Vietnamese community. There obviously is a very big Asian community in New Orleans. And that blew me away. People in this city don't think that it's important enough to talk to that community, because you don't see that community. And so ever since then, I started volunteering with the American Advertising Federation. Has this program called Mosaic, which is a national program that's dedicated to diversity in advertising. And so their focus is making sure that there's a diversity in the people that go through the advertising professionals, encouraging students to take advertising as a major. They highlight diversity in advertising. So for those of you who don't know, the American Advertising Federation puts on the Addy Awards, which is the most prominent and most competitive competition in advertising. They started to do what was called the Mosaic Awards, which is a complement to that. So when you go to on a national level, when you go to the national, the Addy Awards, they also do a Mosaic Awards where they highlight work across the country that is serving or dedicated to making sure that underserved communities are heard. And I was able to attend the Addy Awards and the Mosaic Awards, and the stuff in the Mosaic Awards was so powerful. I was blown away by the work that's being done across the country in terms of highlighting all these underserved communities, underserved voices and stuff like that. And so that's why I think it's important, because when I was growing up, you don't see people like me. There's still not a lot of Asians in marketing. So I think it's very important that you see people, especially at that level, for a CMO to tell me Asians don't matter because they're basically white people.
I mean, look, what I'm hearing is, what I'm hearing, inclusivity doesn't happen by accident. And if you're one of the few in the room, it takes a level of awareness, and it takes a level of courage, it takes a level of risk to say, hey, you might be missing something here. We need to slow down. We're missing a step. And I have to tell you, working in some of the top newsrooms in this country, that is not an easy thing to say. And so I think that's just required. If in whether you are an advocate of inclusivity, or you just are, naturally just, the inclusive ones because of the where you come from. It takes a level of courage and risk, but it doesn't happen, and it won't happen unless there are people taking that step and making these concerns known.
I just want to double down on that. I know for sure that being outspoken has impacted my trajectory in certain places, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. Like, I have always approached every role of I am here for a reason. I'm here to give my voice, to say exactly how I feel, because the whole point of having a diverse newsroom is to get different perspectives. So if I'm just falling in line with what everybody else is saying, I might as well not be here. There's no point to it. So I've never regretted it. Every time that I have, I'm pretty unfiltered to begin with, probably to a fault in other realms of my life, but it's just how I'm built and I can't really change it. But I will say that I've never regretted it. And I feel like it is our responsibility as journalists to speak truth to power, even when it's uncomfortable, even when there might be consequence to it. Otherwise, just pick a different profession. Like, this is not your lane. And I've grown frustrated with people who I deeply respect in other aspects of life, but who I feel have shirked that sense of responsibility to their community and to their role as journalists because they just want to flourish, in their careers. And maybe I shouldn't begrudge that, but I kind of do. And I think that, like I said, I think that we all have a sense of responsibility to speak on behalf of those who don't have access to the rooms that we have.
I think that's exactly what we're learning here at Loyola. Our generation is learning by our professors how to tell stories accurately with representation, with inclusivity, to make sure that newsrooms, hopefully in the top, like you said, can change and adapt to our ways. Can you share with me a moment in your career where you had to make a difficult ethical decision about a story that you had to tell?
There's a my mind's going tick 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 tick. Okay, so from a food perspective, there was a issue that I was doing. It was a few years back on. It was supposed to be like the colorful summer candy issue of sweets, treats, and desserts, very fun and bubbly. And then come to find out that like guavas were going extinct. Like the guavas that a lot of people grew up on were going extinct, and there were generations of children growing up who had never seen a guava tree. Like they just thought it was just something that was like paste. And yet there in Miami, it used to be like one of the main areas where guavas used to come from, and they were disappearing. So I was like, oh no, this is the story. This is the issue. And so I found the guy who was the foremost like leader on guava. And he said he had the guava farm and all the he was on the guava guy, right? He had a lot of information, but and he was very charismatic, like a good Florida guy is charismatic. And when I started trying to really back up the facts. Like, okay, so you have this farm. I want to go to the farm. I want to send a photographer to the farm. He kind of thought that, because, I'm just listening to him, and he did have a lot of great facts, but then he said he had stole papers from, like, the museum of, like, because he was trying to hoard all this information now on guavas. It was the craziest thing. I'm like, this is a Florida con artist, So I was talking to him, and then I was like, I can't include this guy in the story because this is not, this guy isn't who he says he is. I think he was trying to be like the guava influencer of his day. I haven't heard much about him. But then I actually, after spending a lot of time with him, I did let him know, you're not going to, the story broke and he's not included in the story. I completely cut him out of the story. And he came back and he was screaming and yelling and threatening lawsuits and whatever and whatnot. And I'm like, I just laid it in. This is, you can't back up this, you can't back up that. I mean, that could be a story in itself. Like, the guava guy has to go, right? But that was an interesting, because I knew everyone would, the reason why it was a conflict for me was because I know everyone's going to say, here's this journalist said she went to, Miami and did all this deep dive investigative story reporting and then didn't interview the guy on guava. So it looked like it was a kind of a hole, but I also didn't want to just like, he was supposedly supplying a lot of restaurants with guava, like juices and stuff. And it could be that, maybe he didn't tell me about the farms because there could have been illegal immigrants, that he didn't want to expose. I don't think that was the case. So I didn't think the downfall, like the fallout of it all was kind of, it was sort of a measured risk and a story to do down the line if need be. But there was also something I pushed for in the newsroom when Sandra Bland died. When she died, I remember the deputy editor of the National Desk was just like, it's a sad story. She seemed like a great girl. I don't know why she was yelling like that. I don't know why she had a bad attitude. And, I think she just, she just died, and I'm just like, and it was only him and I. Like, I'm just like, this is a conversation that I cannot continue. But after that, I was just like, with his, her, like when, oh my gosh, I can't remember the word, the report that they do at the morgue. The autopsy. Sorry, thank you. The autopsy was coming out, and it was pretty clean. And I said, we have to publish this. And the bureau chief of the National Desk at that time said, I don't think we need to publish it. I mean, there's really nothing to say. Basically, she's saying there's no damning information on it, so there's nothing to say. And I'm like, that's actually why everybody wants to see the autopsy report. Everybody wants to see it. And she's like, if you want to do this, that's on you. You can spend your time doing this. So I got with the science desk, got with their marijuana reporter. And that was like the one thing, talking about how the rate of marijuana system and how this works and otherwise it's clean. It ended up getting with seconds, millions of hits. It went viral. It was on the front page. Everybody wanted to know, and she was just like, wow, I mean, I didn't think anyone would care, because there was no damning information on Sandra Bland. And I'm like, but that's the news. Because everyone thinks that she did something, like it was her fault. At that time, there was also at that desk, when a lot of black men were being shot for while they were running away, a lot of the senior editors at the desk were saying, like, well, why do they keep running? Every morning, well, why did they keep running? And I'm...
Keep going. Peel back another layer.
And so, and that ended up being a whole other story about the overuse of police brutality that we ended up doing, and it's still being done. And it was largely people who were Latino or black. Every once in a while, there was a white male or a white female that would show up with the police brutality and overuse of force. But yeah, I mean, it was a risky decision because it was I had to bring in another desk and collaborate with another department. Their editor got upset with me. Why are you using my editors, my reporters? It becomes very political when you cross departments. So that's pushback from my team. I got pushback from the science desk. But at the end of the day, I was able to get this story out. And we ended up doing 2 stories, I think, on Sandra Bland, and both of them went really, really well. But no, there was also like, no one's saying great job. No one's saying great job. This actually probably gained us a lot of readers and a lot of respect. No, that wasn't the follow-up. So that was a calculated risk for sure on my career, because then I would have taken resources to do a story that did poorly, and then I definitely would have gotten called in and reprimanded for that. But they couldn't reprimand me because it did well.
I think for our company, one of the challenges that we face is just being a black-owned company. So our company is 17 years old now, and the way that our company started, our founder, Cleveland, he was just like this PR guy, and he was just like going around the city trying to get all this PR work, and he ended up starting a company. And when we were first starting off, a lot of the work that we were getting was part of it's DEI, but a lot of like contracts that we were getting were part of like they had to fulfill a certain number of like DEI, like 10% of the work had to be whatever DEI, or go to like a minority or disadvantaged small business. And so when we first started out, Cleveland really had to fight to get the people that we were working with to take us seriously. Like in the beginning, like it kind of felt like we were just there to fulfill a requirement, and nobody really took us seriously. So Cleveland, when we were first starting, it's really funny. He used to come into the office every day, like fully suit, tie, because he needed people to take him seriously, because at that point, nobody really was taking him seriously. He was this black guy that just started the company, and he's getting this work because the perception was we were getting all this work because we were fulfilling contractual obligations for like some of these contracts to have like disadvantaged small businesses. So the biggest challenge for him was having to go into those rooms every time and fight for the work and fight to prove that we belong there. And like one of the clients that we were in one of these contracts with was New Orleans Tourism, and it took a while, but like eventually Cleveland would go to the New Orleans Tourism and say like, you're paying us, let us do the work for you. Like we're not just here, we don't want to just sit here and fulfill some kind of contractual obligation so that this other company can get this contract. We want to actually do work for you. So that's kind of the struggle that we had to face in the beginning. Eventually, we were able to prove ourselves to New Orleans Tourism. We got to do a lot more things with New Orleans Tourism within that contract, but a lot of it is like, some of it, like even with the National Fried Chicken Festival, part of the reasons that we had to do those kind of things was we had to create our own opportunities. So before Fried Chicken Fest, we had a lot of other events that we were just coming up with, because we needed to be able to prove that we could do these things. And some of the opportunities that we're getting, I mean, we're getting contracts, but like they weren't really letting us do anything because we were the minority-owned company that was just there to some of these contracts. And so we needed to create our own opportunities. So we started creating events. We were doing an event. We did like a Millennial Award show. We did this thing called Dinner en Blanc, which is like a pop-up picnic. So we started making our own opportunities, because even though we were getting work, we weren't allowed to do work, if that makes sense. And so like that's the kind of like the challenge that still now like we face with like the misconception of DEI. Like, yes, we're a minority-owned company. We do a lot of diversity DEI marketing because we're the ones that can do it. And so like in lieu of all this DEI stuff, like even right now, it's an extremely challenging environment. A couple years ago, we recently won the largest contract that we've ever had. We won a contract with the Department of Energy, and this was in 2023. So we just got signed to the Department of Energy. It was literally the largest contract we've ever had as a company. And as soon as Trump took office, that week, literally, we lost the contract. Because, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen this viral, the Doge guy that used AI to like look for contracts and had yeah, that was one of our contracts. And so literally 3 days, lost our biggest contract that we've ever had as a company. And so we've kind of had to pivot to like, literally when we write contracts, we consciously don't say DEI, don't, all those keywords that this guy used AI to look for all these contracts, we take them out. Because you see what happens, like that's just the nature of the world we live in right now. And so we've also had to kind of pivot. So we try to do less and less diversity marketing because that's like a vulnerable spot for us. Prior to that, a lot of our work was diversity because like people wanted to use us to reach out to these people that were underserved or they couldn't reach. So that was our bread and butter at one point. But now, like because of all this DI stuff, we've really had to pivot. Thankfully, we opened an office in Houston, and so like as all that stuff, the DEI stuff was happening, that wasn't the only contract that we lost because of that. We've lost several contracts because of the DEI stuff, but thankfully our CEO at the same time decided he wanted to open an office in Houston, so we were actually getting business in Houston as we were losing all these contracts due to the DEI stuff. So thankfully we were able to kind of level off, but as a company, that should have been a point of growth for us. Like we should have been able to like really take advantage of that situation and grow. But because we were losing all these things because of the DI stuff, like we were really just able to like kind of stay the course when we really should have been growing and expanding as a company.
Yeah, all those ethical decisions that you all had to make throughout your careers either dictated whether your job was in danger, whether your company was harmed or improved, which is exactly what we're trying to prevent with our storytelling, is to make sure we're as authentic and representative as we can be. And so thank you for your insights. We are going to turn now to the audience for any questions and Q&As that you may have for our panelists here, and I will be giving you a mic.
I wanted to ask about your magazine, Ireland and Spice. You were working for the New York Times, you were working with a lot of big companies. What inspired that shift and made you want to go out on your own?
So it's a good question. Sam Sifton, who was the food editor at the time, I was an editor, but I ended up doing a piece on beef patties, Jamaican beef patties, and found that in New York, the beef patties are very different than what I grew up in South Florida. And even more so that the beef patty on like every few blocks had changed with the community. They taste just significantly different. And so this ended up becoming a larger story about how Caribbean identity is changing in America and how much America is embracing, these immigrant foods. And so I wanted to, at that time, really look at what does this look like across the country? And so it became a national story about the Jamaican beef patty sort of becoming the next burger. That story went viral. A lot of people got upset. It was covered by the local news, like New York Times is talking about Jamaican beef patties, and now beef patties are going to cost like $10. So it really touched a nerve, and it took like a few days for that to simmer down. And it reminded me, even though I was not covering food at that time, it reminded me what I love about covering food is that it's not just what we eat. It really talks about who we are as a people, how we identify. I honestly, I think food is like the most intimate way. It's the most intimate conversation you can have with someone. The first time we eat food is from drinking from our mother's breast. Food is the most intimate thing that you can ever, in my honest opinion, experience. And we share that among multiple people. And so I did that story. I did another piece on jerk and the peeling back the meaning on that for a jerk chicken festival. And then that's when, Sam's like, I want you to cover Caribbean food for us. Buyouts are happening at the same time. And I was considering, should I go to CNN? Should I stay, see what happens? Had a serious conversation with my husband, and he's like, this is what you want to do. You want to talk about Caribbean food, and this is the chance to do it. So I took the buyout and really decided to really focus on what would Caribbean food look like if Caribbean food was like the center of that conversation. How would I write differently? How would I see differently? How would I look at the food and admire the technique and revere it as much as like French techniques were revered? And so I just thought there was so much to explore. And so now, like Island and Spice, we're going to be pivoting it into a podcast, actually. So that's going to be really exciting, and that'll be our new foundation of having conversations about how Caribbean food is actively shaping American identity. And so that'll kind of, that's the how it's going to continue transitioning. But thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. Now, before we're going to use our last bit of time to introduce someone who came in from New York last night. Her name is Dunya Elvir. She is the national president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. She supported our student chapter into opening here in Louisiana. We greatly appreciate her. I remember she looked at me, she just went, you. So I really appreciate the help that she's helped with our student chapter. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her thoughts and what she thought of the panel.
Thank you, Mabel. I don't want to give you guys my bag. Go here in this corner. The panel's wonderful. I was just, thinking about all of your questions, that how we represent ourselves, the ethical decisions. The biggest thing that you as students will encounter with the ethical situation is if you work for a big corporation, everything's lawyer. These days, you have a huge department of lawyers, then standard department, and by the time you have to go and take your story out, it was modified in such a way that maybe won't send and convey the message that you were planning to send at the beginning, that will link to the first question, which is us. How are we giving the story and the representation? So that's where I think you're going to find the biggest battle. So in that context, if I know this is ending, I don't have too much time in that context, what I'll recommend you guys is always have like two versions of it. And before you go to standards, go to the attorney. Because if you work in a big company, with everything happening right now, they will make you pass your stories through those two departments. And a lot of times when we're new and we don't know how it works, we go to standards to make it look pretty, and then the attorney comes and just takes everything out. So if you go first to the attorney, they're going to put whatever they want in your story to be ethical, but technically they're looking for not being sued. So you eliminate that, and then when you go to standards, it's easier for you to integrate other stuff that maybe they remove, and your language goes there. So that will help you if you work in a big company. If you find your a situation where something it's wrong, don't do it. You are your own brand. I walk away from situations where I told my news director, I'm sorry, I know right now I'm a single mom, have kids, I have to feed them, but because I have to feed them, I can taint my brand. I'm not your token. And it takes a lot, like they were explaining, like especially you working at the New York Times, it's like, I work for a big company too, and it's like, so you feel lonely, you feel pressure. But if you taint your brand, if she would have done something that it wasn't ethically correct, she wouldn't be able to thrive now where she is, because that follow us. So just keep in mind that you're representing not only the journalist that you are, but your community. And in representation, I always think source credibility. How can I talk about undocumented people? Okay, I can do it. I've been doing it for 15 years, but I was also undocumented. So between me and someone that was born here, I'm going to have a different perspective and a different understanding. I can be as powerful as he is about the Asian American community. So not all of you guys will go into reporting. Some of you go into producing, directing. Make sure that you also have that sensibility to understand those little things. Okay, do I want the source credibility that these people bring to the table? I don't know nothing about Jamaica, but that it's my favorite food, and I'm in the grill all the time as soon as I can. But she knows the in and out of her culture. So just think about how you're representing yourself, you're representing your community, and how you can do that in a responsible and ethical way that will embrace that community that you're serving. And that's what I can, kind of go really quick in the 3 questions.
You said, and because a lot of times in the newsroom, it's not always even about the story. It could just be like the politics of the newsroom, because these are hard places to navigate. And you made me remember what kind of kept me going through these decisions was, if I do X, will I be able to put my head on the pillow tonight and sleep? Can I sleep with this decision? Because at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to live with this. And that often meant I was going to say something, or how do I go about getting this done? Like you said, who is my ally here so that I can move this forward? But that was my gauge. That was my North Star.
Yeah, and thinking about allies is important, that you find someone that has power in your newsroom that can understand where you're coming from, because it's not like you want to go in and within 6 months then you're fired, you quit because you're so principled. But always, if it doesn't feel good, it's not good. Somebody else will take it and will value what you bring to the table.
Thank you so much, Dunya. And thank you, everyone, for coming today for today's panel, which reminds us that it's not just about storytelling. It's about our ethical decisions, being responsible, and being as authentic as we can. So please give one last round of applause to our panelists. And thank y'all so much.